I stared at the document on my kitchen counter, its embossed notary seal catching the morning light like some kind of quiet victory medal. Carver Living Trust, it read in clean serif type. Beneath it, my name, Rowan Elise Carver. The house on Hawthorne Lane, the one I grew up in, the one my parents still called theirs, was now legally mine. Not through inheritance, not through some teary family gift, but because I paid it off every last cent over the course of 12 years. 12 years of just until Dad's business stabilizes and we'll reimburse you as soon as Chase gets back on his feet. And Rowan, you're so good with money, you don't mind, right? The mortgage payments had started small, just enough to cover the months they were short. But eventually the bank statements shifted. They started going to me. And last fall, when I made the final payment, 4313, 71, I sat in my car for 20 minutes afterward, hands shaking, wondering what it meant to finally stop owing. I'm 32. I work as a financial strategist for a mid-sized tech firm in Denver. My job is to help clients plan for the future. They say they want college funds, retirement risk buffers. I've built entire models for companies to sustain themselves across recessions and bad headlines. But until recently, I'd never stopped to ask what my own sustainability looked like. The deed had arrived 2 weeks ago. The attorney I'd worked with, a quiet man named Jameson with a dry sense of humor, had filed everything discreetly. They'll get official notice if and when they need to, he'd said. I'd nodded. Hopefully never, I'd replied. But we both knew that was unlikely. And now tonight the timing couldn't be more perfect or more suspicious. Dinner at the house. Roast chicken, Mom's favorite line when something uncomfortable was on the table. Your brother's flying in from Austin, she'd added casually, like Chase ever did anything casually. Just a family night. Family night with my parents smiling too wide and Chase lounging in the chair they never let me sit in growing up. I could already hear the tone warmth laced with obligation. I could already see the way they'd pass the serving dishes, wait for me to finish chewing before dropping whatever bomb they had prepared. I wasn't psychic. I just had patterns. Years of them. I slid the deed into a file folder and placed it in my bag, not to bring out, but just to feel the weight of it, to remind myself that I wasn't going to this dinner empty-handed. I wasn't going out of duty or guilt or some silent hope that maybe this time they'd say thank you, instead of can you. I was going because I'd already made my move, and whatever they thought they were about to ask of me, I had my answer. I took a long sip from my coffee and leaned against the counter, eyes drifting to the window. Outside, downtown Denver blinked in the crisp light of early spring. The mountains in the distance still wore their winter caps, and I wondered not for the first time how far someone had to move to stop being seen only as a resource. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Can't wait to see you tonight. I made your favorite dessert. You've been working so hard, don't bring anything but yourself. Right. I locked the screen and tossed it face down. Dessert. That was new. My mother hadn't made anything for me in years. The last time she baked was for Chase's third engagement party, the one with the woman from Vermont who lasted 6 months and cost them $7,000 in deposits. But they always made it work. They always rallied. For him. For me, they just assumed I would. I walked to the closet, pulled on a dark sweater and jeans, then stared at myself in the mirror, hair pulled back, eyes clear, no trace of hesitation. I wasn't angry, not anymore. That had burned out years ago, sometime between the third temporary loan and the second time I had to pay the property taxes because they forgot. What I felt now was resolve. Quiet. Steel-edged. I zipped up my bag, checked that the file was secure, and headed toward the door. By the time I stepped into the elevator, I'd already rehearsed my lines. Not for them. For me. You're not cruel for saying no. You're not selfish for choosing your future. You're not ungrateful for asking for balance. And when the moment came, because it would, I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't explain. I would just smile and leave. And what they didn't know, what they'd never once thought to ask, was that I'd already made a move they couldn't undo. They started calling me the responsible one sometime around 8th grade. Not affectionately, more like a placeholder for everything they didn't worry about. Chase got the spotlight, the patience, the cushion. I got the nod of approval when I folded towels right, or when I didn't ask for new sneakers even though the soles of mine were peeling. I wore the label like a hand-me-down jacket didn't fit quite right, but I made it work. Chase is 2 years older than me, the kind of older brother who always had a wild idea, a charming excuse, and someone else cleaning up after him. He could talk his way out of trouble before a teacher finished the first sentence. Teachers loved him. Neighbors adored him. Girls followed him around like golden retrievers. He was magnetic, unpredictable, exciting, and exhausting. I used to envy him until I realized that being the one people didn't worry about meant I could plan without interruption. It meant no one hovered while I learned how to stretch $40 through 2 weeks of lunches, or taught myself how compound interest worked before freshman year of high school. I watched our parents pull their hair out when Chase flunked algebra for the second time, while I quietly started tutoring other kids in math for gas money I didn't need yet. I was 12. At 17, I was the one who found an online calculator to compare student loan interest rates, because I already knew I'd be paying for college myself. When I brought up scholarships at dinner, Dad said I had that kind of brain, and Mom asked if I could also look into financial aid for Chase, who was still figuring things out. He was 19 then. Figuring things out meant sleeping till noon and planning to maybe take a gap year, though we all knew that meant he just hadn't applied anywhere. I got into the University of Colorado Boulder with a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs waiting for me. My parents said they were proud, but not once did they ask how I'd be covering the difference. I didn't expect them to. I already had a spreadsheet for that. The first time I helped with the mortgage, I was 20. Sophomore year. I was working weekends at a cafe and doing remote data entry at night. One Sunday afternoon, I picked up the phone to hear my dad's voice tight, unusually subdued. He didn't say the word help. He just mentioned that a client hadn't paid on time, that the mortgage was due in 4 days, and you've always been good with numbers, Ro. Maybe you can help us bridge this just once. I wired $400 that evening. That just once became once every quarter, then monthly, then automatically. It wasn't until a few years later, when I graduated and landed my first salaried job, that I realized the payments had morphed from emergency aid into quiet obligation. Dad still ran his own contracting business, mostly local remodels, and Mom had picked up part-time bookkeeping at a dentist's office. On paper, they looked fine, but the calls kept coming. Short this month. Unexpected car repairs. We'll get you back, promise. I stopped asking when. It felt pointless. At 26, I'd paid off my own student loans. At 27, I maxed out my Roth IRA for the first time. At 28, I began quietly tracking how much I had paid toward the mortgage over the years. At 29, I hired a financial planner not for investment advice, but to talk strategy about real estate protections when personal funds and family property blur. I didn't tell anyone, especially not them. They never asked. They were too busy praising Chase for getting serious when he took a temp job at a local car dealership. That lasted 3 months. He left because the manager was condescending. My parents bought him a laptop to help with job applications. I remember because it arrived the same day I got a flat tire on the way to work and didn't tell anyone. I just used my emergency fund and moved on. Somewhere along the way, I stopped hoping for credit and started focusing on control. They couldn't praise me fine, but they also couldn't access my accounts, couldn't guilt me into co-signing again. I became precise with my generosity. I sent money, but never without a paper trail. Never without a ledger entry. My love became measured in itemized receipts. People say family shouldn't feel like a transaction, but they weren't the ones who grew up learning that love came with invoices. So when I filed the paperwork to transfer the deed, it wasn't revenge. It was accounting. I was the one who paid off that house. Quietly. Completely. And while they lounged in the living room talking about renovations and retirement dreams, I was the one who kept it all from foreclosure more than once. It didn't make me better. It didn't make me angry. It made me the owner. And tonight, when I walk through that front door and sit down to whatever warm trap they've set under the guise of family dinner, I won't bring bitterness. I'll bring awareness. I'll sit where they point smile when it's polite nod through their speeches. But I won't say yes. Because being the responsible one doesn't mean I keep saying yes. Sometimes it means I stop. Quietly, legally, permanently. I was 17 the first time I understood the math of being a carver. It was a Tuesday afternoon, late September, and I'd come home from school with a folded sheet of paper in my backpack and a pit in my stomach. My SAT prep teacher had passed out the recommended reading list, circled the essentials, and underlined the words, "The College Board Official Study Guide, $75. Not optional, not cheap." I waited until after dinner to bring it up, hoping the timing would help. My father was half watching a football game with the volume low, and Mom was flipping through a catalog of holiday decor. Chase was out probably with Natalie, his girlfriend at the time, the one who called me the smart one like it was a disease. "I need to order something for school." I began trying to sound casual. "The SAT study guide. It's $75. Dad didn't look up from the TV. "That's a lot for one book." "I know I said, but it's the official one. Everyone in the prep class is using it." Mom tilted her head. "I thought your school had materials." "This is more in-depth. It's what the teacher recommended." There was a long pause. Then Dad sighed. "Well, maybe you should pick up a few more hours at the coffee shop. $75 isn't nothing." I nodded slow. Not surprised, just disappointed. I was already working weekends at the cafe near the library, plus babysitting for the Jacobs twice a month. I could pull the money together in time, but it would mean cutting into the small stash I was saving for college application fees. Still, I smiled and said, "Okay, because that's what you do when the answer is no, but you're not allowed to get upset about it." That Friday, Chase came home with a used Toyota Tacoma, forest green. 2 doors, scuffed bumper, and a cracked side mirror, but the engine purred and the stereo worked. My parents beamed like he'd brought home a diploma. "For your future," Dad had said, tossing him the keys, "so you can start thinking about real independence." I remember standing at the top of the stairs watching from the landing. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I already knew where I stood on the balance sheet. His future was worth $5,000, and no questions asked. Mine came with terms and conditions. That truck sat in our driveway for exactly 4 months before Chase backed it into a street lamp trying to impress Natalie's cousin. Mom called the insurance company. Dad said boys make mistakes, and Chase got to keep the truck. Meanwhile, I bought the SAT book secondhand from a senior who'd already taken the exam. I studied at the counter during slow shifts at the cafe, highlighting the pages with a half-dried yellow marker and keeping a notebook of vocab words I'd taped to the inside of my locker. I ended up scoring in the top 3% nationwide. Nobody threw me keys or threw me a party. But I got accepted to every college I applied to. That's when I started to realize self-reliance wasn't just expected of me, it was convenient for everyone else. As long as I could figure it out, no one had to stretch. No one had to adjust. They could save their worry for Chase. I was reliable, which meant I was invisible. It didn't happen all at once. These realizations don't, but that fall planted the seed. I stopped seeing money as just numbers on a page or freedom in a bank account. I started seeing it as a lever, something that in the right hands could shift the balance, could reset who owed what, who answered to whom. In college, I noticed it again. Mom would send Chase care packages stuffed with snacks, gift cards, and laundry quarters. Meanwhile, I got short texts. "Proud of you," or "Hope exams went well. I never asked for anything." And so I got nothing. Eventually, I realized the two weren't unrelated. That dynamic followed me into adulthood, tightening around me like a belt, one notch at a time. Chase lost jobs, changed girlfriends, burned bridges, and came home for Thanksgiving with vague plans about startups and networking. I filed my taxes early, paid rent on time, and built a credit score good enough to co-sign his mistakes when our parents asked me to just help this once. The thing about patterns is they only look random until you zoom out, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. So by the time I reached my 30s, I didn't hope for fairness. I didn't wish they'd start treating me like the favored one. I didn't need that. What I needed was to stop playing a game where the rules were always rewritten in his favor. That's what the deed was about. Not revenge. Not even recognition. It was the cleanest math I'd ever done. Input 12 years of payments. Output ownership, result balance. For once, the numbers didn't lie. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon just as I was wrapping up a budget review for one of our newer clients. I glanced at the caller ID, Mom, and hesitated. It had been a couple of weeks since our last conversation, which consisted mostly of her relaying the state of their tomato plants and casually mentioning that Chase was in between things again. Nothing unusual. But midweek calls were rare. She usually preferred Sunday afternoons when she could talk without distraction while pretending to fold laundry. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, Mom." Her voice was bright, almost effervescent. "Hi, sweetheart. How's my favorite financial wizard doing?" I smiled, cautious. "Good. Busy, but good. You?" "Oh, we're fine. Just getting the house in shape. You know how your dad is with spring cleaning, everything becomes a construction project." She laughed lightly. "But listen, we were thinking it's been too long since we had a proper family dinner. Just the four of us. Chase is flying in Friday. We thought Saturday evening would be perfect. No occasion, just something cozy." There was a beat of silence just long enough for me to picture her standing at the kitchen counter winding the phone cord through her fingers, even though she'd long ago switched to wireless. I knew that tone. The breezy, everything's normal tone she used whenever something decidedly wasn't. She continued almost too casually. "I'm making roast chicken your favorite. That lemon rosemary one you always liked. Remember, I hadn't mentioned that recipe in years. She hadn't made it in even longer. I remember I said, "Saturday at what time, 6? "Sharp." Her voice brightened again, as if relieved that I hadn't asked too many questions. "And don't bring anything, just yourself. We've got it all handled." "Okay," I said, letting the silence do what questions couldn't. She filled it anyway. "It'll be nice. We haven't all been together in so long." I agreed, murmured something about looking forward to it, and ended the call with a polite goodbye. Then I sat at my desk staring at the screen, the spreadsheet in front of me forgotten. It wasn't the invitation itself that made my stomach tighten, it was how pleasantly scripted it all had been. Like she was reading from a cue card, like someone, maybe both of them, had practiced how to say just enough without tipping their hand. Chase flying in was another red flag. He never came home unless something had gone wrong or someone had promised him something, and no one brought up favorite meals and no occasion in the same breath unless they were buttering you up for something big. They were planning something. I didn't know what, but I knew the scent of setup when I caught it. And this one reeked of intentions dressed as affection. I turned back to my desk and opened the locked drawer on the right. Inside was a slim file folder labeled Carver Trust. I pulled out a crisp copy of the property transfer confirmation, my name in bold, the notary seal, still slightly embossed against the paper. I looked at it for a long moment before folding it neatly and sliding it into the inner pocket of my purse. I didn't plan to bring it out. I didn't want drama. But if the evening went where I suspected it might, I wouldn't be caught unarmed. That night, I called Rachel my closest friend and the only person who knew about the trust. We met our freshman year at CU Boulder and had been each other's emergency contact ever since. "They invited me to dinner," I said, skipping hello. Rachel didn't miss a beat. "Just a casual, let's all sit around and pretend we don't want something dinner." "Exactly. Roast chicken bingo." There was a pause. "Are you bringing the document I wasn't going to?" I exhaled. "But yeah, it's in my bag." Rachel made a soft sound of approval. "Good, just in case they try anything theatrical. Or manipulative," I added. Same difference. She offered to come over afterward just in case I needed to decompress. I told her I'd let her know. I wasn't sure what I'd be walking into yet, but I was certain of one thing: this wasn't about food. On Friday evening, I ironed a simple blouse, packed an overnight toiletry kit, not because I planned to stay, but because it helped me feel prepared, and checked the deed one more time before zipping my purse. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked composed, but my jaw was tight. There was a tension in my chest that felt like an old injury flaring up before a storm. 12 years of being the good one. 12 years of bailing out, holding up, covering gaps no one else seemed to notice. And now, a family dinner. With Chase, with roast chicken, with a folder in my bag they didn't know existed. Let them set the table. I was bringing clarity. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was slipping behind the houses on our street, casting long shadows across the lawn I used to mow every Saturday morning. The house looked cleaner than usual, like it had been staged. The porch lights were already on soft yellow pooling around the front steps. Chase's rental SUV was parked haphazardly at the curb, taking up more than one space, of course. The door swung open before I even knocked. My mother stood there, apron tied perfectly at the waist, her lipstick one shade too bright. "Rowan, you're early." Her voice was a pitch too high. Come in, dinner's almost ready. Chase just got here. Oh, and I made that lemon rosemary chicken just like old times." I stepped inside, the scent of herbs and forced nostalgia clinging to the air. The house looked different, not just tidy new. A sleek leather sectional where the plaid couch used to be. A flat screen mounted above the fireplace replacing the old cabinet TV. A glass coffee table that screamed not child safe. These weren't upgrades made on a whim. These were investments, expensive ones. "Hey," Roe Chase called from the living room, holding a glass of wine and grinning like he hadn't ghosted our family for the better part of last year. "Look at you still wearing black like you run a hedge fund." I offered a thin smile. "Good to see you, Chase." He came over to hug me, smelling faintly of aftershave and overconfidence. "You look good, solid, financially stable." He said it like a compliment, but there was a flicker in his eyes that felt more like calculation. "Thanks," I replied, removing my coat. "The house looks different." Mom appeared at my side, smoothing her apron. "Oh, just a few updates. You know how quickly things age. The couch was practically falling apart, and your dad insisted on the new television. He says he can't read the scores on the old one anymore." She laughed too hard. "Anyway, let's sit. Everything's ready." Dinner was laid out in careful symmetry. Cloth napkins, polished silver candles lit just enough to feel warm, not intimate. My father was already seated at the head of the table, carving knife resting beside him. "Rowan," he said with a nod. "Glad you could make it." We took our seats and the meal began. Conversation moved in safe, shallow waters. Chase talked about his new fiancée, Melissa, or maybe Marissa. I didn't quite catch it, who couldn't make it because of some scheduling nightmare with her brand deal. I asked what she did. He shrugged. "Influencer stuff, wellness, crystals. She's killing it." Mom chimed in with gentle prompts. "Tell your sister about the house you two are thinking of. Or the honeymoon idea you had, was it Greece? Maybe Greece, maybe Cabo," Chase said. "Depends what kind of gift money we're working with." I took a sip of my wine, slow and silent. Then came the toast. Dad raised his glass. "To Chase and Melissa. May this next chapter bring happiness, growth, and a little more direction." We clinked glasses. I smiled politely. Then Mom cleared her throat. "And since we're all together..." She looked at me with that same too bright smile. "We wanted to share some plans for the wedding. Nothing's set in stone, of course, but we've made a few decisions to help move things forward." My fork paused mid-air. She reached over to touch my hand, light-practiced persuasive. "We've decided," she said breezily, "that you'll cover the wedding costs." Silence bloomed. My hand remained still beneath hers. She went on. "You're in such a good financial place now. That promotion, your condo savings, you're doing so well. And this way, Chase and Melissa can focus on starting their lives without debt." I blinked. "Once." My father cleared his throat and added, "You'll also be helping with the home renovations. We've been meaning to update the kitchen. It's time we modernized." He said it like it was already happening, like I'd already agreed. Chase looked smug. "It's just the kind of thing successful people do, right?" I set down my fork. "Excuse me for a moment." No one stopped me as I rose. No one followed. I moved down the hallway toward the guest bathroom, but bypassed it, slipping instead into the old study. The desk still had the same chip on the corner from where I'd dropped my high school laptop. The same books lined the shelves, some mine, some theirs. I closed the door behind me and sat in the desk chair, heart steady but breath tight. They hadn't asked. They'd decided. That was the part that landed hardest. Not the money, not even the assumption, but the entitlement, the certainty that I would say yes, that my success was just a family asset waiting to be distributed. They thought the silence meant agreement. It didn't. It meant calculation. I reached into my bag and touched the corner of the folder. Not to bring it out, not yet. Just to remember it was there. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't raise my voice or throw accusations across the dining table. I didn't ask them if they remembered every time I bailed Chase out, or how many months I quietly paid the mortgage so they wouldn't default. I just walked out of the house with a polite smile and a nod that felt more like a period than a farewell. The night air was sharp when I stepped outside, crisp with early spring chill. My heels clicked against the walkway in a rhythm I hadn't noticed before, steady, even intentional. The kind of sound a person makes when they're sure of where they're going. When I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, the silence that filled the car wasn't cold. It wasn't sad. It was peaceful. No one followed me out, no calls, no second thoughts. I didn't cry. I didn't rehearse arguments in my head or try to reframe their words into something softer. I just drove the familiar road home, Denver's lights unfurling in the distance, and thought they really thought I'd say yes. Back in my apartment, I didn't change out of my clothes right away. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop. The folder was already on my desktop Carver Trust docs. I reviewed everything again, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted the clarity. The kind that comes when you've been pushed 1 inch too far and find unexpectedly that your feet are already braced. The next morning, just after 7, I called Jameson, my estate attorney. He answered on the second ring voice, as dry and dependable as ever. Rowan. Everything all right, I'd like to send the formal notice, I said. Today? A pause. Then a quiet hum. Understood. I'll email you the final signature form for release. I'll sign within the hour. You're sure? Yes, I said. I'm done waiting for permission. By 9:15, the documents were signed, scanned, and sent. Certified mail. Delivery confirmation requested. By the time I opened my inbox that afternoon, the acknowledgement had already arrived. The title transfer was now officially recorded, and the Carver family home, every brick of it, was legally held in the name of the trust I had built, managed, and secured. Mine. Quietly. Thoroughly. Lawfully. The first text came the next morning. Mom, Rowan, we got some strange mail. Something about a property title change. Is this a mistake? Then 15 minutes later from Dad. Dad. We received legal documents claiming the house deed was moved to your name. What is this? I read both messages while standing at my kitchen sink, waiting for the kettle to boil. Outside, a neighbor walked his dog, pausing to wave. I waved back. The steam rose softly in front of me, blurring the window. Then I opened my phone and replied. Me. It's not a mistake. You assumed I was an asset. I've decided to act like one. No further explanation. No apology. They didn't reply that day. Or the next. Instead, the silence turned inward. Not heavy, not tense. Just complete. That weekend, I met Rachel for brunch. She studied me over her coffee mug, eyes narrowing. You did it, didn't you? I nodded. And they got the notice yesterday. Her eyebrows rose. And your phone hasn't exploded. They're still in the shock phase. She leaned back, impressed. You're a legend. I didn't feel like a legend. I felt clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next request, the next assumption, the next moment where I'd be asked to absorb the fallout of someone else's irresponsibility. I'd drawn a boundary, and more than that, I'd enforced it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and reviewed my financial plan. My emergency fund was solid. Retirement contributions on track. Savings earmarked for a home of my own. Technically, I already had one now. It was just currently occupied by people who had never thought to ask what I wanted. I didn't know how they'd respond next. Maybe they'd try to guilt me. Maybe they'd try to undo it. Maybe Chase would show up at my office with another wild speech about keeping the family together. But I also knew the rules had changed. Not because I told them they had, but because I'd already made the move that mattered. Not every line has to be drawn with a raised voice. Some are signed in silence, sealed in envelopes, and delivered right on time. The silence didn't last. By Monday morning, it cracked wide open, starting with a voicemail from my mother, tight-lipped, wounded, as if she were delivering news of a funeral no one saw coming. Rowan, I'm not sure what's gotten into you, but this was cruel. You blindsided us. "We need to talk. Call me back." I didn't. An hour later, my father left his own message angrier. "We raised you better than this. We've always done our best. And now you're what punishing us? Is that what this is?" I didn't respond to that one either. By noon, the tone had shifted. Mom again this time, tearful. "Your father hasn't eaten all day. He just keeps pacing the kitchen." Chase is furious. "We're trying to understand, Rowan, but you're making it very hard to see your side of this." I didn't answer because there was nothing to say that hadn't already been signed, sealed, and delivered. The texts started that evening. Long winding threads about betrayal, about family, about "how could you?" Chase chimed in, too dramatic as ever. Chase: "Real nice Ro, you could have just said no, but instead, you go full legal drama." Over a house, Chase again: "You betrayed the family, don't pretend otherwise." By the third day, I'd started to keep my phone on silent, not because I couldn't handle it, but because I was finally choosing not to. For years, my inbox had been a delivery system for obligation. Now it was just noise. That Wednesday, after clearing my schedule for the afternoon, I called Dr. Janet Maynard, a therapist I'd had on a maybe one-day list for 2 years, but never felt bad enough to reach out to. I left a simple message. "Hi, this is Rowan Carver. I think I'm finally ready to talk." She called back the next morning. We scheduled a session for Friday. That evening, I made a small but symbolic change. I opened the Notes app on my phone, went to the list titled Words That Sting, and deleted the top entry, "Selfish." It had sat there for years, written during a sleepless night after I turned down a cosign request for Chase's business loan. The guilt had eaten at me for weeks. Back then, no felt like an act of war. Now, it felt like currency. Dr. Maynard's office was a modest space tucked above a bookstore downtown. No cliché arty, no calming waterfall wall. Just a worn armchair, a sturdy clock, and the kind of silence that doesn't ask for small talk. She was in her 50s, warm but incisive, and didn't waste time. "Tell me what brought you here." I told her everything. The dinner, the assumption, the years of invisible math and louder praise for doing less, the way they'd celebrated Chase's whims and resented my boundaries, the documents, the aftermath. I expected to feel raw, exposed. But mostly, I felt like I was finally saying things out loud that had been true for too long. When I paused, she leaned forward slightly. "You didn't burn a bridge, Rowan. You marked the edge of your property. There's a difference." I stared at her, then blinked, then smiled. We spent the next 40 minutes talking about patterns, about how children learn that love sometimes means being useful, not seen, about how families create roles. The star. The screw-up, the savior, and what happens when someone stops playing their assigned part. I used to think if I didn't help, I'd be failing them, I admitted. But now I think maybe I was helping them fail by always stepping in. Dr. Maynard nodded. That sounds like insight to me. That night, I walked home feeling lighter. Not happy, not fixed, just less burdened. As if for the first time the weight wasn't mine to carry anymore. Back at my apartment, I brewed tea and opened my laptop. A dozen unread texts blinked on my screen, each more frantic than the last. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. "Explain yourself. Come fix this. We didn't raise you to be this way." No one had asked what they had raised me to be exactly. But I knew now they raised me to solve problems, to be useful, predictable, accountable. They didn't raise me to say enough. So I'd raised myself. And now finally, I wasn't just managing my finances. I was protecting my future. The thing about family debts is they're rarely written down. They live in half-finished conversations and vague promises in "we'll get you back" and "just until next month." For years, I never tracked it. Not formally, not on paper. I thought keeping score was petty. I thought that's what people did when they didn't love each other. But somewhere along the way, I started remembering the numbers. Like the year Chase got pulled over for his second DUI. I was 24. He called me from a police station in Pueblo, slurring half his words and crying through the other half. "I can't tell Mom and Dad," he said. "They'll kill me." "Please, Ro, you're the only one who won't judge." I covered the fine and the lawyer, $1,300 total. He never brought it up again. Never said thank you. 2 months later, he posted pictures from Cabo with some girl named Aubrey holding a cocktail and smiling like he'd never seen a holding cell in his life. Then there was the roof. I was 27, just out of my first promotion and starting to feel like I might finally breathe. Dad called one night, said they had a leak in the back corner of the house near the sunroom. Insurance didn't cover the full repair. The contractor was someone he trusted, and they'd quoted just under $4,000. "It's too much," he said, voice low. "But you've always been good at weathering things. Maybe you could spot us." I wired the money that week. When I followed up 6 months later, politely carefully, he acted surprised. "I thought we agreed it was your contribution," he said, genuinely puzzled. "You know, to the family home, like it was an honor. Like I'd been invited to donate to a cause I should have been grateful to be part of. But the worst wasn't the DUI or the roof. It was the business loan. Chase had an idea, some drop-shipping hustle he swore was going to take off. He'd even made a pitch deck. He wanted to build an online empire. His credit was shot, but mine wasn't. Just cosign, he begged. "They need someone stable. You don't even have to put money down." Mom called me after. Said it would mean the world to him. Said he needs someone to believe in him. Said I was the only one who could make this happen. So I signed. A $15,000 small business loan. He defaulted before the second quarter. When the letters started coming, he ghosted. I paid off what I could. My credit took the hit. No one ever mentioned it again. Not even him. These things never showed up on a ledger, but I carried them all the same. Not as bitterness. Not even as regret. Just as quiet evidence. A running tab of what it cost to be the stable one. I remember telling Dr. Maynard about it, my therapist, and how her face didn't change when I listed each event. When I finished, she just said, "You were taught that being the reliable one meant saying yes, no matter what it cost." I nodded. "But you were never taught how to say no, even when you couldn't afford to keep saying yes." That stayed with me. Because she was right. I hadn't known how to say no. Not because I didn't want to, but because I'd been conditioned to believe that refusing to help made me ungrateful. Cold. Worse. Selfish. But now, the house was mine. Not symbolically, not sentimentally, legally, tangibly, unequivocally. And that wasn't revenge. That was protection. That was setting the balance right in a place where it had tilted dangerously for too long. It was the difference between giving and being taken from. The difference between love and leverage. People talk about family as a sacred bond, something unbreakable. But sometimes that bond turns into a leash. And when that happens, cutting it loose isn't betrayal. It's survival. I didn't need them to pay me back. I wasn't keeping a scorecard, but I was done pretending like it had all been equal. Like my silence had meant consent. Like every bailout wasn't shaping a story where I was the only one writing checks while everyone else kept adding to the bill. What I'd done with that deed wasn't punishment. It was finally paying myself back. It was just after noon when I heard the knock too loud, too fast on the glass partition outside my office. I looked up from my monitor halfway through revising a Q2 projection, and there he was, Chase. Wearing a bomber jacket that didn't fit quite right, holding a to-go cup he wasn't drinking and pacing in place like he'd already run out of patience. "Your brother's here," Malia, our receptionist, said into the intercom. "Wants to speak with you. Urgently." I closed my laptop with a sigh and stood. "Send him back. It'll just be a minute." He walked in like the building owed him something. Didn't look around, didn't smile. Just tossed the coffee into my trash can like we were back in high school and I was supposed to clean up after him. "You've got some nerve," he said before I even had a chance to sit. "You've ruined everything." I stayed standing. "Hi, Chase. You could have given us a heads up, you know," he snapped. Or, God, I don't know, talked to us before going full corporate ninja on the house. "I didn't ruin anything," I said calmly. "I protected what I paid for." His eyes narrowed. "You didn't say anything." I met his glare without blinking. I wasn't asked anything. Chase scoffed, pacing in a tight line. "You blindsided Mom. She's been crying for days. Dad's furious. And you just walk away like it's some kind of power move." "It wasn't a move," I replied. "It was a boundary." He leaned against my desk, arms crossed. "So what? Now?" You're the landlord. You gonna start charging them rent? Kick them out if they're late on utilities. I haven't decided, I said. But that's not really what you're here about, is it? He hesitated, and there it was, the flicker, the shift from performative outrage to something closer to fear. You need them to fix the house so it'll sell better, I continued, voice level. Or maybe you need them to free up cash so you can secure a loan for whatever business venture you've pitched to Melissa's parents. Am I warm? Chase didn't answer, but his silence was loud. You had plans, I said, plans that involved money you assumed was available. His jaw tightened. You've always made things harder than they needed to be. No, Chase, I said. I've just stopped making them easier. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. For the first time in years, he looked like someone trying to figure out how to recover. Not just from the financial hit, but from the realization that the fallback option had walked away. I need you to reverse it, he said. Undo the trust thing. Put the house back. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a card, plain white embossed. I slid it across the desk. He looked at it without touching it. What's this? Her name's Dana. She's a financial counselor, neutral, smart, fair. She won't judge you. He stared at the card like it might catch fire. I came here asking for real help. You came here asking for money I corrected. I'm offering what I wish someone had given you 10 years ago, accountability, a plan, a chance to build something that lasts. You sound just like Dad, he muttered. No, I said. Dad enabled you. I'm not doing that. He stood suddenly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. You think this makes you better than the rest of us sitting here with your spreadsheets and perfect little life? No, I replied. But it does mean I no longer have to bankrupt myself to make you feel okay. He looked around my office as if just now noticing the quiet order of the space. The framed certificates, the tidy desk, the sense of calm. This isn't how family works, Ro. I gave him a long, steady look. Then maybe you should ask yourself what kind of family only works when one person keeps footing the bill. That landed. He didn't respond right away, just stared at me breath shallow like he wasn't sure what version of me he'd come to confront, but it wasn't this one. After a moment, he picked up the card. I'm not saying I'll call her, he muttered. I'm not asking you to, I said. That's the point. He stood there, another second card in hand, then walked out without saying goodbye. As the door clicked shut, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel vengeful. It felt necessary. I turned back to my laptop and reopened the spreadsheet. Because while he was looking for rescue, I was already working on repair, the kind you do when the only thing left worth saving is yourself. It started with a Facebook message from Aunt Leslie. The kind of message that began with "I've held my tongue long enough," and ended with something between a sermon and a guilt trip. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, but suddenly she had deep thoughts about my coldness and lack of grace. I didn't respond. Then came a text from my cousin Mallory, who once borrowed $500 and ghosted me for a year. Mallory heard about the house. Just, wow, you hurt your parents, Ro. That's not what family does. And then Mallory, you've changed. I stared at that second message longer than I probably should have. Yes, I have. That weekend, 2 old family friends, people I remembered mostly by the smell of their perfume and the way they used to pinch my cheeks when I was 10, left long-winded voicemails. We just don't understand what's gotten into you, one said. You were always the good one, the respectful one. This just isn't like you. That's when it clicked. They weren't angry because I'd done something cruel. They were angry because I'd stopped performing the version of myself that made them comfortable. For years, I'd played that part flawlessly. The polite daughter, the reliable niece, the one who showed up to bridal showers with the perfect gift and offered to help clean up, the one who didn't complain, who paid the bill when someone's card randomly declined, who kept secrets to keep the peace. Now that I'd drawn a line, I was suddenly selfish, unrecognizable, changed. Yes, I had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of it. I started replying with just one sentence. To Mallory, to Leslie. even to my dad's high school friend who emailed me some nostalgic memory about how my parents always meant well. I wrote, "Yes, I've changed, and I'm proud of it." I didn't elaborate. I didn't defend myself. I didn't send bullet points or spreadsheets or receipts. I just let them sit with that. Because the truth was, I'd spent most of my adult life believing silence was a form of maturity, that biting my tongue was noble, that letting things slide was the price of belonging. But now I saw it clearly. My silence hadn't been protection. It had been complicity. Every time I absorbed an insult, let a financial boundary be crossed, or laughed off something that left a bruise, I wasn't just tolerating it. I was validating it. And now that I'd stopped, the system was rattling. Because when one person in a dysfunctional pattern stops playing their part, everyone else feels exposed. Dr. Maynard put it best in our latest session. They're not reacting to your cruelty, Rowan. They're reacting to your clarity. That clarity was growing louder in my life. Not in anger, not in shouting, but in calm, intentional responses. In the boundaries I didn't apologize for. In the bills I no longer offered to split. In the plans I made without factoring in who might need saving next. There was one message that did stop me, though. It came from Mrs. Hastings, our old neighbor, from when I was little. She used to bring over banana bread on Sundays and send me birthday cards even after we moved. Her email was short. "Just this, I always admired your strength. I hope you know that choosing peace doesn't make you the bad guy. Sometimes it makes you the only grown-up in the room." I sat with that one for a while, reread it 3 times, then saved it in a folder I titled Real Things. The backlash didn't stop, but it got easier to tune out. Because every message that told me I was ungrateful or unrecognizable only confirmed what I already knew. The version of me they missed was the one who didn't know how to say no. And I'm not her anymore. It started with a voicemail. Short, quiet, almost embarrassed. "Hi, honey. It's just me. No tricks. Just wondering if you'd like to meet for lunch. Just us. I'd really like to talk." I listened to it twice before deleting it. Then I waited a day. Then another. By the end of the week, I texted back one word. "Okay." We chose a small cafe on the east side of town, neutral ground halfway between her neighborhood and my office, where neither of us had history. The kind of place with calming music, big windows, and too many types of herbal tea. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a glass of water in front of her untouched. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and for a second I didn't recognize her. My mother had always been the image of composed. Hair perfectly blown out, subtle lipstick gold studs in her ears. But today there were lines on her forehead I'd never noticed before. Her sweater was a little wrinkled. She looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Hi," she said, standing halfway as I approached. I nodded. "Hi." We sat. The server brought menus. Neither of us opened them. She exhaled slowly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I took a sip of water. "I wasn't either." She nodded, eyes down. "I don't know what I thought I'd say. I guess I didn't realize what we were doing to you until you made it stop." The words hung in the air like a confession. Not quite an apology, but not nothing either. I didn't rush to fill the silence. For once, I let her sit in it. Her voice dropped. "Your father's angry, but I think deep down he knows. We both do. We just didn't expect it. You've always just handled things." "I did," I said, "until I couldn't." She looked at me then. Really looked. "You were always the steady one, even when you were a kid. Chase was wild and you kept us balanced." "I wasn't balancing," I said. "I was absorbing." That made her flinch, but she didn't argue. "I don't need you to explain," I added. "I know how things happen slowly, how expectations pile up." She nodded again quietly. It felt like, "If we didn't ask, you might offer. And if you offered, it wasn't wrong to accept." "That's how it felt to you," I said. "To me, it felt like I was only valuable when I was useful. And the second I drew a line, I became the villain." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We never meant to make you feel that way." I didn't respond right away. Because the truth was, I wasn't there for an apology. I wasn't there to hear regret or repair the past. I was there to find out if we could have anything real going forward. After a moment, I said, "If we're going to try again, have any kind of relationship, it has to be different." She folded her napkin in half. "What do you mean I mean this?" I said. "You can't ask me to be the bailout anymore. Not for the house. Not for Chase. Not for anything." She swallowed. "I understand. No hints. No guilt. No stories about how things are tight and you're not sure how the bills are going to get covered. I don't want to be pulled back into that role just because I'm capable." Her eyes shone a little. She blinked quickly. "I want to see you," I said, "not manage you." She reached for her water, sipped, then set it down. "I don't know how to do that yet, but I'd like to learn." For the first time, I believed her. The server came by, and we finally opened the menus. We ordered soup and sandwiches, talked about small things, the weather, a book she'd read, a show I'd been meaning to watch. It was halting cautious, but it wasn't fake. She didn't bring up the deed, or the house, or Chase, and I didn't bring up the past again. We finished lunch. She hugged me gently at the door, not too tight. Like she wasn't sure yet if she had the right. I appreciated that. As I walked back to my car, I felt something strange. Not joy, not reconciliation, but a kind of quiet, like I'd stopped bracing for impact. Like maybe this time, if we moved forward, I wouldn't be walking into another trap. And if I was, I knew I had the strength to walk right back out. By the time Chase called again, the trees had turned and the air had shifted. Autumn in Denver always carried that particular kind of crispness, like the year was starting to close its tabs, clearing space for a quieter kind of breath. It had been 4 months since his outburst in my office. 4 months since I'd handed him a card instead of a check. I hadn't heard a word from him since. The call came in mid-October. No warning, no build-up. Just his name flashing across my screen while I was sorting groceries on the kitchen counter. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Hey. Hey," he said, his voice different. Not upbeat, not apologetic, just calmer. "I'm not calling to yell," he added quickly. "That's good," I said softly, "because I'm not answering to argue." He let out a quiet laugh. "Fair enough." I leaned against the counterphone tucked to my ear. "So, what's going on?" He hesitated. "Then I got a job." My eyebrows lifted. Yeah, it's nothing flashy. Retail management at a garden center outside Boulder. Seasonal for now, but they're talking about keeping me on. I've been showing up. On time. Which is like revolutionary for me, apparently. I smiled faintly, not because I was impressed, but because I was relieved. "That's good, Chase. It's not saving the world stuff," he said, almost apologetic now. "But I needed to do something that didn't involve waiting for someone to bail me out." I figured that was step one. He didn't say it to flatter me. He said it like someone who had sat with their own reflection a little too long and didn't quite recognize the person who looked back. "I'm trying, Ro," he added. "I really am." "I know," I said. And I did. I didn't know if it would stick or if this was just one more turn in the long cycle of Chase's chaos. But something in his tone told me this time the effort was real, even if the direction was still uncertain. We didn't talk long. 15 minutes, maybe. Enough for him to mention a budgeting app he downloaded and the fact that he'd gone 30 days without borrowing money from anyone. I could hear the pride in his voice, small and shaky like a flame trying to catch. "I'm not asking for anything," he said as we wrapped up. "Just wanted you to know." "I appreciate that," I said. After we hung up, I stood still in the kitchen for a while, holding the phone in both hands. Not sad, not overjoyed, just still. It was the kind of peace that comes when you realize someone might not become who you wished they'd be, but they might be learning to become someone all the same. The next morning, I went to the closet in my home office and pulled out an old padded envelope. Inside, I slipped a slim spiral-bound workbook I'd kept from a finance seminar I'd once taught for recent college grads. Budgeting basics, simple charts, no fluff, no shame. I flipped to the page I wanted titled The Debt Avalanche Method and marked it with a single sticky tab. No note, no lecture, no explanation, just a quiet offering. I sealed the envelope, wrote his name and address on the front in my neatest print, and dropped it off at the post office that afternoon. No part of me expected a thank you. That wasn't the point. It wasn't a rescue. It was a rope thrown toward someone who had finally stopped waiting to be pulled and started learning how to swim. Back home, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the balcony. The sun was already lowering behind the buildings, casting long orange streaks across the sky. I thought about all the years I'd spent planning my life around damage control, about the energy I'd spent trying to make everyone else okay. Now they were figuring out how to be okay without me, and I was figuring out how to let them. The porch light flickered gently against the fading gold of late afternoon, casting soft shadows on the chipped white railing that had stood through decades of weather and wear. I stood on the front steps of the house I'd once memorized, blindfolded the way the screen door stuck the sound the floor made in the upstairs hallway, the tilt of the gutter over the garage. Every line of this house had once been drawn in obligation. Now it was something else. The new tenants were a young couple named Emery and Jordan, recently married, both working at the nearby medical center. They'd found the listing through a quiet private network. I used no big agency, no fuss. Just the right kind of people for a home that carried as much history as foundation. Emery opened the door with a warm, curious smile. "Hi, Rowan, right? That's me," I said, returning the smile as I stepped inside. The air inside was different now, cleaner, lighter. The walls had been freshly painted a soft gray. Where my mother's antique sideboard had once stood like a monument, there was now a simple wooden bench with houseplants and a pair of hiking boots. The house no longer whispered with ghosts of unspoken expectations. It breathed. "We wanted to thank you again," Jordan added, joining us from the kitchen. "Finding a place like this, in this neighborhood, it's a miracle." "I'm glad it found you," I said and meant it. We did a final walkthrough together, me noting the condition of the upstairs shower curtain rod, Emery jotting down a reminder to replace the smoke detector batteries. I answered their questions, smiled at their nervous energy. I could tell they wanted to make this place their own, and that was the point. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. When they stepped out to run errands, I asked if they minded me staying a little longer. "Just to close out a few notes," I said. "Of course," Emery beamed. "Take your time." The door shut behind them with a soft thud, and suddenly it was quiet. Really quiet. I wandered from room to room slowly. Not sentimental, just observant. I wasn't chasing memories anymore. I was confirming the distance between them and me. In the kitchen, I remembered my mother leaning over the counter lecturing me about savings while I stood there 20 years old, having just made my first rent payment and sent half my paycheck toward their mortgage. Upstairs, in what had once been Chase's room, I glanced at the spot where Dad had kept the giant file cabinet with all the important papers. None of them had my name on them. Not back then. I made my way to the hallway closet and pulled down the last remaining item, a small manila folder. Inside was the final copy of the rental agreement, a maintenance log, and one photo I'd kept tucked in from years ago, a Polaroid of me at 17, standing in front of this house in a borrowed blazer, holding up my first debit card like it was a trophy. I stared at it for a second, then smiled. "You got here," I said aloud softly. "Just took the long way." Outside, I walked to the edge of the driveway where the mailbox stood freshly painted, still slightly crooked. The nameplate had been changed. R. Carver. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Not for social media, not to send to anyone, just for me. Proof that this place, once a shrine to sacrifice, was now something different. Not a burden, not a prize, just a property, a smart investment, passive income, not emotional debt. The act of reclaiming wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeance or triumph. It was quiet, grounded, simple. I slid the phone back into my pocket, took one last look at the house, and walked away without checking over my shoulder. Ownership. I realized wasn't just about deeds or names on a title. It was about the emotional weight we assign to places, roles, histories, and the decision to let them evolve. This house no longer needed me to hold it together, and I no longer needed it to prove I was worth anything. The evening light poured across my balcony in a way that made everything look softer. Denver's edges blurred just enough to make the world feel almost gentle. I sat with my legs curled under me, a cup of ginger tea growing cool in my hands. On the small patio table beside me, a cream envelope lay, opened its contents, resting like a quiet trophy, the monthly check from the property management company. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was steady, clean, untouched by guilt or obligation, just earned stability. It still surprised me how simple peace could look after so many years of effort. No grand gestures, no courtroom drama, no explosive showdowns, just paperwork boundaries and follow-through. A breeze tugged at the loose strand of hair by my ear as I leaned back in the chair and listened to the hum of the city 2 floors below. This apartment, sunlight-drenched and minimalist, had become my first true home, not because I decorated it with intention or chosen every object carefully, but because no part of it was shared out of necessity. No piece of furniture carried a story I didn't want to retell. Everything here was mine, chosen, not inherited. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it and saw the name before the message. Mom. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not out of animosity, just rhythm. She'd respected the condition I'd laid out, and I'd held my end of the boundary too. I unlocked the screen and read the text. Mom, thinking of you. Chase says he's budgeting now. He seems lighter. Just that. No pressure, no requests, just an observation sent like a peace offering. I stared at it for a moment, then locked the screen and turned the phone face down. I wasn't angry, not anymore, and I wasn't withholding out of spite. I just didn't feel the need to respond every time the past knocked. Some things are better left on read, not because they don't matter, but because you've finally learned the difference between presence and participation. I looked back at the check. It struck me then how different this win felt from the ones I used to fantasize about. In the past, I thought justice would come with applause, that finally standing up for myself would feel like thunder in my chest. But it hadn't. It felt like silence, like walking out of a dinner without looking back. Like the click of a deed transferring in your name, like the absence of being needed for the wrong reasons. The victories that last aren't the loud ones, they're the ones that keep you warm when no one's watching. From the apartment next door, I heard someone laugh, a child, maybe 6 or 7, giggling at something a parent had said. It drifted into the air like music, and I smiled. Somewhere in Boulder, my brother was pulling weeds between shifts at the garden center. Maybe penciling out which bill to pay next. Maybe swearing at a budgeting app. I didn't know, but I knew he was trying. Not performing, not manipulating, just trying. And my parents, they still had each other, still had their house, still had their memories of a daughter who always came through. Until she didn't. They called it betrayal. I call it balance. Because in the end, it wasn't about payback. It was about stopping the silent erosion of self that comes from being the family scaffolding for too long. It was about realizing that love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's currency. And I wasn't for sale anymore. The sun dipped lower, casting golden streaks across my legs. I sipped the now lukewarm tea, letting its sharpness settle on my tongue. Peace isn't always sweet. Sometimes it's bracing, quiet, firm. But it's still peace, and this time, it was mine.